welcome everybody to the second in a series of 3 sessions on procurement for innovation. It's 3 different sessions we're having across Europe. Yesterday we were in London, focusing on security and defense issues. Today we're going to be talking about global developments in procurement for innovation, and then tomorrow we'll be in Milan. And we're just very, very grateful to Google for having hosted us here and hosting us in Milan tomorrow. I should say we're not getting any money from Google, but we did get a nice free lunch. And so I have to tell you, Ed, we're going to see how Milan compares to Paris in terms of lunches. It's a very nice facility here. Very, very pleased that we could be here. I'm going to walk through the schedule with you guys in just a second. Oh, just one caveat is the speaker statements are in their personal capacities today. We have folks coming from very different angles on this. We want to make sure that those statements are not attributed to them in any official capacity. So as I said, yesterday was defense and security. Today is global developments. Tomorrow is European developments. The defense and security issues really overlap in very important ways with what we'll be talking about today. And that's one of the points we'll be making as we walk through the discussion, so that you understand the challenges that are being faced in the defense and security world, the challenges, for example, how to access private capital. Those are issues that show up in other parts of public procurement as well. And there are, what we discussed yesterday, and the recording is going to be available shortly. What we discussed yesterday is that the legislative and the legal developments that are going on in the United States, in many ways parallel with going on in Europe as well, in terms of common issues such as access to capital. Okay, so we're going to have presentations today on artificial intelligence from Jessica Tillipman from GW Law School. Jessica has really spoken internationally on this issue, and I'm going to give you her full bio in just a second. We're going to have András Hlács talking to us from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, from the OECD here in Paris. And we're also going to have a discussion of the European Investment Bank report on the use of public-private partnerships from Stephen van Garsse. What I hope, and we'll also have presentations, is from a couple students at GW who'll be talking about competitive methods. That's something we'll be talking about in class next week as well. How do different competitive methods make it easier to acquire innovation? What I hope you guys, in terms of the class, what I hope you carry away from today's sessions is 3 different things. One is how important capital is in driving, how important private capital, which is largely overlooked, but how important private capital is in driving public procurement. The second issue is, how do you structure public procurement? Instead of just using the same process over and over again, how do you optimize a public procurement structure? And the third is what Dean Tillipman's just about to talk to you guys about, which is artificial intelligence and how that affects. Now, she's going to be talking to you about the procurement of artificial intelligence. I want to talk to you just for a brief second about the pedagogy that surrounds artificial intelligence and why Jessica and I are so focused on understanding how artificial intelligence will shape the practice. So it's possible now to write a legal brief. When you guys go into practice, it will be possible for you to write a legal brief in 20 minutes using AI. Instead of 20 hours, you'll be able to write it in 20 minutes. The practical problem is that you have to make sure that it's right when you use AI to produce in 20 minutes. And the only way you'll be able to do that, the only way you'll be able to be effective lawyers and members of the broader professional community, is by really understanding the subject matter. So that's reshaping how we do pedagogy. And for example, it reshapes how we work with other professors and other programs. One of the reasons that I'm teaching you guys next week is so that you guys have a grounding in American procurement law, because you have to understand the substance moving forward in a much more complicated world. So that's the other aspect of AI. Jessica will be talking to you about the procurement of AI, but you have to understand how AI reshapes your world as professionals. So tomorrow we'll be in Milan, and we will be joined by Gabriele Racco, who's online today as well, to be discussing some more specifically European developments. Now, Ed Boulay is in the, you can see him there on the screen. He's the Senior Counsel and Manager of Google's Europe, Middle East, and Africa Public Sector Legal Team. He advises on strategic projects in transactions with partners and customers in the public sector across the region. Before that, for 10 years, he was an attorney with the firm of Herbert Smith Freehills, both in London and New York, London and Tokyo, where he was a corporate and commercial solicitor specializing in the technology, media, and telecommunications sector. So the secret agenda in having you guys here is so you can begin to see how international lawyers work, how you can advance through a career ladder such as Ed's had. Okay. Leading us off substantively will be Jessica Tillipman, who's our Associate Dean at GW in the Government Procurement Law program. Our program started in 1960, so I'm the second generation of professors, and Jessica is very much in the third generation. See how the program evolves over time. She's the Associate Dean for Government Procurement Law Studies and Government Contracts Advisory Council, Distinguished Professorial Lecturer in Government Contracts Law, Practice, and Policy. Jessica, we need to get you a shorter title. She is a leading authority on public procurement, corruption, and the governance of artificial intelligence in the public sector, with a particular focus on integrity, compliance, and emerging technology risks in government contracting. She teaches the law school's foundational government procurement course, Foundation of Government Contracts, and anti-corruption and compliance, which examines corruption, ethics, and compliance issues in public procurement. She's the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Public Procurement Corruption. She was the co-editor with Shope Williams, who's a professor at Stellenbosch University. So you begin to see the international cooperation. Her scholarship and commentary address legal and policy issues involving public procurement corruption, which is a nice way of saying she has spoken to the press a lot during the Trump administration. She regularly advises and provides training to governments, international organizations, and oversight bodies on public procurement corruption and AI procurement governance, and is a frequent speaker at domestic and international conferences on these topics. Her commentary appears frequently in leading domestic and international media outlets. Second up will be András Hlács, who's from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And we've talked a lot about this a great deal, András and I, and the Paula Magina, who heads the procurement unit. In many ways, because of shifts in the structure in our world, for instance, the fact that the UN has less funding available from the United States because of shifting circumstances with regards to the World Bank, the OECD has in many ways moved to the forefront of thought leadership in this area. So we're very, very glad that András can join us. We're very grateful for the work that the OECD has done. Among other things, the OECD has developed a way of assessing procurement systems around the world, which simply did not exist 25 years ago. The methodology for assessment of procurement systems, if you work in this area and you work in other nations, the MAPS methodology for assessment of procurement systems, very, very important tool that the OECD helped develop. And I can't begin to describe to you how rudimentary, how primitive this international procurement world was before the work that the OECD had done. András is the vice chair of the OECD Committee on Digital Economic Policy and counsel at the permanent delegation of Hungary to OECD and UNESCO. In this capacity, he participated at the previous fora and moderated sessions on, he moderated sessions in active defense, how part-time businesses go in practice in proactive security in 2018, and international cooperation to enhance digital security innovation. Before moving to Paris, András worked as senior strategic consultant at the National Research Development and Innovation Office of Hungary from 2011 to 2015, where his duties mainly focused on science, technology, and innovation-related program and strategic planning. András holds MA degrees in English language and foreign relations, with specialization in American studies from I'm going to butcher this, the EDCOVAS, am I pronouncing it correctly? Loránd Science University of Budapest. Thank you for your patience. After András, Stephen Van Garsse will be joining us, and he'll be talking to you about the European Investment Bank report on the use of public-private partnerships, which is an important insight on how private capital can be used for procuring for innovation. He's a professor and vice dean, the head of the research unit and the Minister of Law and Public Administration at the University of Hasselt. So he wears a lot of hats in his work. He specializes in public law, particularly public procurement and concessions and public-private partnerships. You're going to hear about his detailed work on public-private partnerships. He's one of the leaders in our community, public-private partnerships, which are an important tool used here in Europe for accomplishing public procurement goals. In the United States, certainly at the national level, almost unknown. So this is an area where in the next few years, there are likely to be a lot of lessons learned that are shared from Europe with the United States, with the federal government. And we'll talk more about that as we go. He's also an attorney of law, admitted to the Brussels Bar, and a board member of the Bureau of the Working Party on Public-Private Partnerships at the UNECA. He's a lead researcher on circular public procurement in the European ITM Sapiens project and the Flemish Research Center on circular economy. We'll also be joined remotely by two students from GW. The first is Hyan Tran. She's currently a consultant at the World Bank and she's my doctoral student at the George Washington University Law School. She's a graduate of Hanoi Law University, where she earned her LLB, as well as a graduate of the Transactional Law and Business University Law School in South Korea. So she got degrees both in Vietnam and South Korea before she joined us. Lena Rockner will be appearing with her. Lena is an LLM candidate and at GW. Before beginning her studies at GW, she worked at the Norwegian Complaints Board for Public Procurement from 2017 on. So she was in the Complaints Board for 10 years. So a lot of in-depth experience in working in Norway on EU adjacent procurement law issues. She most recently served as a legal consultant and previously as a section manager. She's a graduate of the University of Bergen, earning her LLB and LLM, as well as a graduate of Bonn University's LLM program. So to understand, Lena and Hyan will be appearing today and tomorrow. It's easiest to understand what they're talking about if you understand who they are. Hyan may well go back to Vietnam and become a professor in Vietnam. So her goal is to be able to explain the competitive method called competitive dialogue or competitive procedure with negotiation. She wants to explain it to students in Vietnam. Lena Rockner, in contrast, will probably remain in the transatlantic community. She'll probably be either working in the United States or working in Europe. So her goal, which she'll be focusing on tomorrow, Lena will be focusing on explaining why are the two cultures so different? Why does the United States take one approach to multilateral negotiations while the European Union takes a different approach? Again, to understand what they're talking about, it's easiest to understand who these two women are with very different perspectives. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jessica, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm looking right this. Does somebody have control of the slides? Because it looks like I do not have control.
Yes, I can.
Oh, and I forgot to mention one very important person, which is Cheryl Blake. Cheryl is one of our students. Cheryl is a U.S. Air Force officer, and she's helping with this. And she's also an LLM candidate and enormously patient. And whatever crises we incur as we travel across Europe, Cheryl has been very, very patient and supportive. So I'm very grateful for it.
Thank you for that, sir. Dean Tillipman, I can mute us here just to make sure that none of our sound kind of creates an echo, but I'll advance the slides for you on your signal.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you, Cheryl, for this. I appreciate it. Okay. All right, we don't even know. Well, I guess I can just give you a quick introduction to this. So, first of all, again, thank you for having me here today. This is a small snippet of a presentation that comes from my brand new article. It comes out and will be available, I believe, within the next week or so, available for free open source on SSRN. It is being published by the Public Contract Law Journal. It is something I've been working on for years, and so this does feel like quite a moment. It's called Buying Blind, Corruption Risks and the Erosion of Oversight in Federal AI Procurement. It has had some dramatic changes, particularly over the past year in the United States. But some of this is just a bit of it, but it's been globalized to demonstrate some of the lessons you can learn from how the US is approaching the acquisition of AI and what that means in terms of both buying or the acquisition of AI and what that means for the deployment of AI in procurement. So, right, so we have the two sides of the coin, acquisition of AI and AI for acquisition. And so the choices that one makes in the acquisition phase will dramatically impact the capabilities of AI in the deployment phase. So keeping that in mind is the framework. And again, Chris will have a link to the SSRN page and the new article when it's available in the next week, but I'm sure you won't miss it with me screaming it all over social media. So, okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Cheryl. So oftentimes I hear two different things from individuals when I'm speaking about AI or presenting on it. I hear half the group says AI is just like another IT purchase and we should just treat it like that. And then I hear another group that says, no, it's definitely different. I don't understand the AI is just another IT purchase group of people. AI is, to me, incredibly different, and I'll explain why. AI has unique features, capabilities, flaws, limitations that you just don't see in traditional IT purchases. First of all, we're dealing with an incredibly concentrated market. Now, that's not new to the space of federal procurement, but in my article, as I go into much detail, I don't have as much time here. I talk about the extreme concentration at the cloud service provider, level of the AI system or the AI ecosystem. Sorry, Google, which is one of them. That's great product. The AI infrastructure, the foundation model layer, some extreme concentration even in the application and service level. But we're dealing with a market that's extremely concentrated. That's not only present in AI, but it's been present in some other areas. But that is something unique about AI. It's extremely opaque. That happens not only because of technical limitations. We often hear that people say AI is like a black box, but it's also because of contractual limitations, because of the way that governments have negotiated transparency rights into AI has limited their ability to look at it. It has emergent behavior, it has embedded bias, it has hallucination, it has all these things. And the best way to think about it is to frame it in terms of what governments normally buy. So if you had a bridge that suddenly changed its load-bearing capacity 6 months after construction, you would probably want to bake in some terms and conditions into your contract that manage that very unique and problematic risk. Yet AI drifts, and we see increasingly that governments defer to customary commercial terms and conditions that may not address that. If you had, for example, a government map that confidently made up roads and rivers and mountains and streams and buildings, you might have some concerns and need some additional testing rights and oversight and audit rights and transparency rights. But in AI, we know that it hallucinates, and we, again, are increasingly deferring through commercial terms when we buy that don't allow some of those rights. If you knew that you had a bulletproof vest that protected some individuals but didn't protect others, you would probably want significant disclosures, transparency, oversight, and testing requirements. AI has bias. Yet again, when we default to customary commercial terms and conditions that don't take those things into account, we weaken government's rights to utilize these really important and exciting tools. I am a big AI fan, but have some concerns about the buying pathways. All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is a US-based chart, but there are lessons that can be construed or taken from this that can be applicable globally. Generally speaking, you have a variety of governments around the world that are taking different approaches to regulating AI. Some governments, so we look at the EU, many people will see kind of more comprehensive regulatory reform, though I think that that's a bit in flux right now. And we see different approaches. The United States has really been a bit of a seesaw or ping pong. We have some higher level statutory authority. We have had a back and forth between administrations in terms of how we regulate AI. Now, since the Trump administration's AI action plan, we have a very heavy deregulatory posture where we're not moving forward with comprehensive regulation. So instead, because we are not looking at this from a comprehensive regulatory pathway, and we have some sub-regulatory guidance, though that does contradict the AI action plan scope within the United States, we're really turning to a means of what we call regulation by contract, which I believe, and I argue in my article, is profoundly inadequate for this moment in time and for what we're buying. But as you can see from this chart, when governments buy using different procurement techniques, whether it's commercial, whether it's what we call negotiated procurement, whether it's framework agreements that have negotiated rights and obligations at the enterprise level, but then at the ordering level, you may have different rights and obligations, though generally can contradict what's negotiated within the overarching framework. And in the United States, we're also experimenting with newer forms of procurement, called other transactions, among others, that give greater flexibility in negotiating rights, obligations, oversight, transparency, though because they are designed to attract more commercial and newer innovative firms to the federal marketplace, we generally wouldn't see it being used as expansively as it could be in order to not deter these newer entrants. And the arguments that I make in my article is that each one of these buying pathways and how the government buys comes with greater governance rights or greater governance rights capabilities and reduced governance rights. So if you were generally only buying things using traditional commercial pathways or through license upgrades, where, for example, no disparagement to Google Workspace, you have Microsoft Teams and then you upgrade it with Copilot or Google Workspace and then you upgrade it with Gemini, you may not have as much governance rights if it's not negotiated at the outset. And so again, the different types of limitations you have are dependent on that buying pathway. And again, because of my limitation of time, I'm not going to go into too much of this in detail, just to let you know that this is something governments should be thinking about as they're buying, whether it's internationally with other governments, whether it's, the MDBs, state and local, among others. Okay, next slide, please. And then, of course, all of this is going to be colored by the AI supply chain dynamics. The challenge we have is globally, workforces or acquisition workforces are unprepared for AI and for buying AI. There's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of capacity, there's a lack of experience. And because of this, a lot of what we're starting to see is that governments around the world, whether it's a university or school system, local police department or otherwise, are defaulting to the commercial providers who have significantly greater experience and understanding of these important tools. Now that, because of the capital requirements necessary for not only the cloud service infrastructure, which is generally 3 firms, it can be a little bigger, the chip provider, we've got NVIDIA, it's all of this is fairly heavily concentrated, and also the capital requirements associated with building these complex foundation models. All of that really does impact the negotiating dynamics that governments, universities, school districts have when procuring these things. And again, it's going to have an outsized influence on the way these things work. Now, because of those supply chain dynamics, it might reduce the negotiating leverage that the government might have. And also, again, it also creates potential downstream deployment risks when you have such a concentrated market and you don't have the ability to seek alternatives. That also can complicate things. It also can hinder newer entrants that may be tied to certain cloud infrastructure or other certain foundation models, depending on what the government's using, its security requirements, among other things. But again, all of these things are going to impact buying pathways and its overall impact on government AI acquisition deployment. Next slide, please. And again, I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm running through these. Okay, so if you've ever seen a presentation with me, you've probably heard me screaming from the mountaintops about how much I dislike what the United States government has done in terms of what it calls its OneGov or dollar deals. Now, what the United States government has done is effectively negotiated for the next 12 to 18 months with a wide variety of AI providers. Yes, Google is one of them, but also Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic, XAI, and most recently in the last few weeks, Perplexity, for generally well below market prices, these kind of introductory prices ranging from anywhere from $1 to free for the next, again, 12 to 18 months. In the United States government, we have the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Part 3 right in there is this term called buy-in. What that effectively does is capture the concept of loss leader, where you take a hit at the outset for a promotional period, and then after that promotional period ends, that price will then balloon. Now, many of us in our own personal lives are familiar with this. If the United States, whether it's Netflix or Hulu, you think about those streaming services where they lock you in at $3.99 a month or free for 3 months. And suddenly after the promotional period ends, that balloons and you like it so much you stay. And that's the hope. We're going to get the foot in the door of many of these very prominent and I'd say the most prominent kind of generative AI providers. And the goal of the United States government in doing this was kind of rapid adoption, rapid expansion. And the challenge we have with this is that none of the underlying agreements have been made public. So we do not know whether or not the government negotiated exit at the outset of these agreements. Now, why do I care about exit? Because what we know about technology is that if you're not thinking about interoperability, about egress fees, about many other considerations when you're negotiating these agreements at the outset, then exit is going to be prohibitively expensive for you. And indeed, we're already seeing statements that have come from the United States government saying, hey, how much is this going to cost agencies if it's 25 cents for the entire agency for 18 months? What's that going to look like, you know, when that promotional period ends and the AI tool is already well embedded into our workflows and people like it and they're used to it and they don't want to get rid of it and the price balloons. And that's the challenge. Understandably, vendors love this model because, again, it gets your foot in the door. And it's helpful, but from a government and governance perspective, it creates weaknesses and it takes the government's negotiating leverage off the table. And to be clear, it's not just a United States issue. This is a global model. We're seeing it adopted by governments around the world. Even my children's own school district, just a month ago, I got an email hearing about how they've adopted OpenAI across the entire school district for 2 years for free for a pilot. And this is where I warn folks that pilots do not mean sending everything out into your entire workforce for 2 years for free. Pilots typically have small user groups that test things for a limited period of time. There's nothing wrong with free or below market for small user groups for discrete pilots. But when you're using a pilot or promotional pricing for rapid expansion, rather than just a modest sandbox, that's where you see risks of lock-in and buy-in. Okay, next slide, please. And this is going to be exacerbated by global workforce capacity issues. We know that our acquisition workforces are not prepared. We know that most governments use things like retail training to assist, that we're chasing a moving target, and this is a global challenge. And right now, I feel like very much in many governments, it's cart before the horse. And when we don't have workforce capacity to provide adequate oversight, to negotiate these terms and conditions effectively, we result in situations where we have a lack of oversight, a lack of transparency, and increased risk. So what do we need? Procurement needs a seat at the table. This reminds me of the debates we had around 2008 and 2010, where we said, what role should compliance officers have in companies to reduce risk? And we said, compliance officers need a seat at the table. They need a senior level position. They need to be involved at the outset. Procurement needs a seat at the table when governments are making these technology decisions. You know, from the outset, they need to be part of the discussion. They should not be just consulted at the end when they become mere order fulfillment. And so, again, sorry if I went a little bit long, but I tried to speak a little bit about that. But I'll be back tomorrow to talk about more risks. So thank you.
Okay, you can't see the room, but the room is chock-a-block full of professors. Question for you that's related to AI and it's related to your work as a professor. Do you allow your students to use AI in producing papers, and how do you handle that?
Great question. Okay, so here's the thing. Most of my students will tell you this, and actually I want to just say this to Google. Shout out to Notebook LM, like the greatest product that has ever been created. I aggressively encourage them throughout the semester to use AI as a learning tool. So for example, right now in the United States, we're going through the FAR overhaul. And one of my greatest tips for success is that I would scrape all of the data that the government was providing in terms of guidance of the new rules. And then I would compare with all my old notes and my slides from the old rules to basically come up with a comprehensive way to look at those changes instead of just looking at a line out, which is not particularly helpful. And then I would drop it into Notebook LM. And then what's been amazing is Notebook LM keeps improving, and you can actually edit the podcasting function. So I would very much, I tell me what's the length of time I want, what do I want it to focus on? And then I would create a podcast that would walk me through the changes in this like dynamic format. And I would listen to it on my way into work every day. And that's how I memorized all of these dramatic changes so quickly. And so tools like Notebook LM, tools like, and I'll say, I'm going to use this because Google's hosting us, but I know there are other platforms, but Gemini has the ability to make really nice tables. So you can feed it information and it can organize it in a way that can be used. So all through the semester, I was using these tools to help students with decision trees, with tables, with, again, podcasting functions. Though I will say, Edward, I have a very sad case that students had to read, and it involved like the death of individuals, and the podcasters were talking about it. And then they were like, and then the bodies were all over the road. Ha, ha, ha. And I was like, I should warn them that maybe you want to not laugh at that part. Which to me was just very kind of funny, not the deaths, but the podcast. But so good. Now, let me stop here. That does not mean AI writes your papers, and it does not mean that AI writes your exams. And my students already know that if I suspect it in any sort of way, because AI has some tells, I'm going to send them to the integrity committee. And the only other thing I will say about papers, and I'm sorry I'm running a little long on this, is I think AI is the most incredible editor. So I agree, even in my new paper, especially when I was trying very hard to toggle between, making it accessible to technologists who don't understand procurement experts who don't understand technology, I would consistently run sections through and say, first of all, am I adequately explaining it or accurately explaining it? Is this accessible? Is there unnecessary jargon? And AI to me is incredible for identifying redundancies, things you would have your editor do in real time, but not writing it for you, using it for things that I think would be acceptable, but are not the AI tool writing your paper for you. So I hope that helps, but I do think that all universities and schools are grappling with the impact of AI and cheating and all that sort of stuff.
Thanks very much.
Amazing.
So I'm going to turn it over now to András to talk about developments in the procurement of innovation from the OECD's perspective.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Yukins, and it's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of the OECD, and it's a pleasure to be here at this event hosted by Google, and also to be among strategic partners like the George Washington University or University of Nanterre. It's great to be here, because without you, we wouldn't be that thought leader that you mentioned. So grateful for that. But why is innovation in procurement is important? How to best promote this uptake of innovation procurement? Why we talk about innovation in procurement at all? Well, one of the aspects that we need to understand is that it is important to ask about these questions because of how much procurement accounts for when it comes to GDP globally. On a global scale for the OECD average, we talk about 13%. But when it comes, for example, to certain countries like France, it's even above that. We talk about even more than 16% of the GDP they spend on an annual basis on public procurement. And public procurement can have a catalyzing role in private-public collaboration. But it is also important to understand that public procurement at the same time can also, through innovation procurement, can bring in new services and solutions to government operations. And why this is important? It is important because at this moment, everybody wants to have more resilient economies, more innovative economies. You want to have more green and digital transition. You want to have better public services. You want to have more SMEs being involved in procurement processes, who are more innovative, who can bring better solutions. And for all of this, innovation procurement can be a great tool. There are certain innovation procurement tools around the world, starting from the SBIR in the United States, the SBRI in the UK, but also, for example, in Europe, we have the public pre-commercial procurement or the public procurement for innovation. All these tools are very important, are already out there, are already part of the legal systems and the regulations, just to help governments and procurement officers to get better solutions and better services for their demands. And it's also out there to help public sector innovators, to economic operators or companies, to be able to sell their products, to work together with the governments, and this way make our lives more innovative and the public services for better quality. The OECD has a long-standing work in this regard of innovation procurement. We started it all before in 2015, and even beyond that, when the first version of the recommendation of the Council of the Public Procurement has been produced, that has already recognized innovation as an important factor when it comes to procurement. And from then on, from every year, we had some kind of new publications that focused on innovation procurement. For example, in 2017, together with the European Commission, we published a good practices report on how how good practices and strategies are being carried out in innovation procurement around the globe. And then from then on, as you see, as we're getting closer to 2025, we have more and more publications. One that we published last year that I'm going to talk a bit more about together with my fellow colleagues Bruno Monteiro and Paulina Boechat, which was about the public procurement and how it can help public sector innovation. But we also published this year an implementation report of the public procurement recommendation, which has a section focusing on innovation procurement. But we also had country programs financed by the European Commission's Technology Support Instrument with Estonia and with Croatia on how to leverage strategic procurement, innovation procurement for economic resilience. And last but not least, this year, the OECD published a new flagship publication, Governing with Artificial Intelligence, which looked at 11 different government functions and how AI is used in these different functions, one of being public procurement. So there's a whole chapter on how AI is used in public procurement, how AI is facilitating and enhancing procurement functions. But it also has a whole part focusing on how procurement can help the implementation of AI in the public sector. And in this regard, innovation procurement, in a broader sense, can be a useful and strategic tool. Just as Jessica Tillipman has mentioned before, because these are more complex digital technologies that need to have more complex procurement approaches. Simple procurement processes cannot deal with complex digital technologies. In this regard, innovation procurement can be a solution and a tool for better and more accountable implementation of AI solutions in public sector. So the publication that I would like to talk about a bit more that has been published last year was the approach where we try to get together procurement officers and also government innovators in order to better understand how innovation procurement is working on both sides. And one of the things that we understood from the very beginning, that there has been some challenges that need to be addressed. There have been some bottlenecks when it comes to the better use of innovation procurement. And there we set up 4 different categories, 4 different pillars. One being improving the design and the development of innovation. The second one being developing inclusive and targeted solutions. The third one being reducing barriers. And the fourth one being advancing effective policy tools. And for each one, we looked into the challenge, what the challenge was, what the purpose of the solution could be, and what are the concrete translation of the solution that could be done. And for example, when it comes to the first one, the improving the design and development of innovation, we saw that there was a lack of experience with innovation procurement as a barrier to identify innovation solutions. So there could be a facilitation on contact and knowledge of innovation procurement. And eventually, there could be methodologies and contractual arrangements to engage with possible providers to co-create and procure innovation solutions at the very early stage. We also, as countries, we had a group of countries of 14 countries who helped us to better understand what was happening in their respective legislations and in their respective procurements, and to better understand what are the solutions that they were using out there. We also looked into other examples from other countries as well. And eventually, oh, it was something that I'm sorry, I missed. Oh, I might have gone to the. Yeah, now they will see that I'm doing this. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So we created a database of over 53 cases spanning from 24 countries, just to see how the analytical framework can be used in this regard. And we saw that there are solutions everywhere for every single pillar, every single challenge that we enlisted, one being on the practices to improve the design and development of innovation services and goods. For example, in Luxembourg, the GovTech Lab uses open innovation to work with internal and external actors. Or we saw also that the practices to ensure that innovative policy solutions are inclusive and targeted their beneficiaries. In Austria, the innovation platform showcases innovative ideas to help public servants, for example, to better understand what are the innovative solutions that are out there in order to be able to reach out to those and bring them into public procurement processes to showcase their solutions. Or we can talk about the practices to reduce barriers and frictions. There in Australia, the digital marketplace was designed as an online procurement platform for digital and ICT procurement. And last but not least, we had the practices to promote innovation policies in the public sector by innovation procurement. And there in Sweden, the digital arena uses demand acceleration as a methodology for how the public sector can drive innovation. So you can see that there is a lot going on when it comes to public procurement. There's a lot of programs that are being financed by the European Commission as well, both as on a joint collaboration between countries, but also as part of the technology support instrument, where they are subsidizing and funding countries themselves, governments, to help them promote innovation procurement. So there is a lot going on. There is a lot of regulations that are helping innovation procurement. But the question is the private sector interested in innovation procurement? Because once you have the tools, but on the other hand, is there a request, a demand from the private sector side that they would like to be engaged in innovation procurement processes, which are, to be fair, in sometimes quite lengthy and take a lot of time. So what we did is that in one of the countries that we worked with, in Croatia, we made a survey. We made a survey where we reached out together with the Ministry of for National Economy, to 5,000 economic operators, to companies. And we tried to get their feedback on their understanding of innovation procurement. And we received more than 1,100 responses, which is a very nice turnout. And it turned out that among those 1,100 respondents, 61% of the companies, the economic operators, did not know much about innovation procurement, even though innovation procurement has been around for years in Croatia. We also understood that 48% felt that there was a lack of vision in innovation procurement, which prevented them from participating in innovation procurement, which also followed by the understanding of there was a short time and the lack of capability and capacity to be engaged in innovation procurement. So in this regard, what we see right now is that when it comes to innovation procurement and the use of innovation procurement, there needs to be an overall cultural change in the approach, both from the governments and both from the private sector point of view. There needs to be first a look for opportunities that will lead the way. We need to also understand to build the trust and the risk acceptance regarding innovation procurement, because in the end of the day, sometimes innovation can be risky, and sometimes there is a possibility that the innovation that's being procured will not carry out the solution that was intended. And in this regard, to be able to have a less risk-aversive approach to innovation procurement, and to be able to embrace risk as an option, as a potential to learn, can be a good solution as well. However, for this, innovation procurement as such in itself cannot be regarded as a risk. We also need to have more collaboration and involvement of the private sector in order to understand what they can offer, and also the private sector can understand what is out there regarding innovation procurement that governments can conduct. And last but not least, there should be a constant learning and exchange of practices between the private and the public sector, but also within the public sector actors, which we also did, for example, in the case of our paper, is that we sat down with colleagues who were working on government innovation to better understand their perspectives and what they can bring in to this project with regard to what public procurement can also offer from our end. So as you can see, the culture of innovation accepting change is important. And as we heard from Jessica Tillipman as well, in this regard, the use of pilots and sandboxes can be a good solution. There needs to be courage, there needs to be openness, and there needs to be curiosity, because at the end of the day, it all becomes one global, how should I put, one global and an important effect for the use of innovation procurement in the future. So with this regard, I would like to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
If I could just ask a quick question?
Yes, please go ahead.
So at the Boulay, he has a team of Google
procurement lawyers and procurement specialists. It's an international team. Many of the students in this room may work for teams like that across borders in the future.
Yes.
When they're doing that, so they're being trained as lawyers.
Mhm.
So they're looking at laws.
Yes.
Should they, from your perspective, now that you've looked at many different systems, should they be considering these as laws with a certain sanctity because they're laws, or should they consider them tools to make a better procurement system, like you would look at an operating manual for a car? Are they rules or are they tools? How would you approach it? How would you counsel them to approach it?
Innovation procurement or the laws and regulations that is behind.
How best to accomplish, how to get best value out of procurement when you're buying innovation?
Well, there are certainly several approaches to innovation procurement, because on one hand, you need to understand as a procurer what you are purchasing, what you need. Do you need an innovation solution which is already out there? Because then you will have quite straightforward procurement solutions that already exist, even starting with open procedure all the way to competitive dialogue. Or is there something that has not been addressed yet by the market? But then you need to understand what the challenge is. And in order to understand the challenge, what lays before you, you need to reach out to the other departments as well. You need to collaborate with other departments within the government, within the organizations, to understand their perspectives. Because one of the important things about innovation procurement is that by understanding the important strategic role of public procurement and embracing it when it comes to more innovative public solutions, public procurement needs to be brought to the table where the strategic decisions are made. Because once you have those capabilities, once you have those people around the table, then you can ask the question whether the challenges that has been put on the table has already been addressed or not. So in this regard, I think that one of the important things is that we have to understand the laws and regulations out there, but we also have to understand what we are looking for. And in this regard, once we understand whether we want to address challenges or we just want to purchase innovative solutions, then we can have a much better understanding what are the processes and methods that we're going to use.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Quick question. Talking about the evolving change of culture.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you ever tried to do some reflection on the career of the procurement officers. Because if you want to allow innovation and to take risks, you need to have some sort of protection, because if it fails, the career is ended. So at the OECD, I think that's reflection, how we can change the way we approach the career to allow risk.
Thank you very much for this question. And actually, the answer is yes, we looked into that and to the OECD. And one of the things that we see, for example, when it comes to building competencies is, for example, the European Commission has a competency framework, which is called the Eurocom, and where there are several modules that actually procurement officers can take on in the format of a professionalization, where basically you can learn about new approaches as regard to innovation, as regard to risk-taking, as regard to digital technologies. One of the things that we see right now is that when you want to empower public procurement officers about taking the risk and using innovation procurement, there are some legal boundaries regarding the fear of making something bad and then eventually being held responsible for that. And we see good examples in Korea, for example, where in Korea, what they did is that once someone is involved in an innovation procurement, even if that innovation procurement at the end didn't go as planned, they will not held responsible for the so-called misconduct of public budget, because it was regarded as a pilot, as a sandbox, and it was not conducted as a regular public procurement. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is that this is also something that we saw in Croatia and in Estonia as well, is that continuous training of procurement officers about innovation procurement, them understanding what are the opportunities and learning from other countries is also very important. In both countries, for example, we manage trainings for public procurement officers, and we invited other countries like Finland, like Norway, to talk to them about their their experiences, about the lessons that they could learn from their procurement procedures. And it's important to see that once the procurement officer sees that in other countries something is already working, they will have the courage to try to do it in their respective legislations and countries as well. However, once again, sometimes we cannot expect everyone to be innovation expert when it comes to procurement officers. So in certain countries, they are also creating competency centers where they are very much focusing on innovation procurement. So they can help out other procurement officers when it comes to the conduct and management of procurement processes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question.
So Stephen's going to be joining us, and as Stephen's approaching the podium, just want to point out from a comparative standpoint, just again, that everything is the same all over the world. What András was referring to before, what Jessica Tillipman was talking about giving procurement a place at the table, is actually a major issue in state procurement in the United States. The National Association of State Procurement Officials is actually spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in a PR campaign, a public relations campaign, precisely to do that, so that the governor's office take procurement officers more seriously. It's interesting to see the parallel.
Yeah, thank you.
Stephen?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me, and I agree with your comment, and also the question is very interesting, because I think the past decade the function of public buyer is becoming more and more important, and also of course procurement law. So, but that on a side note, I'm here to give you some ideas and information on public-private partnerships, and to introduce you to the recent report of the EIB, it's the European Investment Bank, on public-private partnerships. Its report was released in April 2025, so quite recently. Now, first of all, what are PPPs? Well, PPPs are basically mechanisms that bring together the government and the private sector to implement public infrastructure and public services, and so to set up a collaboration, a long-term. Most of the time, it's a long-term contract between the public and the private sector, also involving private finance for public services or for public infrastructure. And it is widely used. It's widely used in the EU, and also, of course, outside the EU and a lot of other countries, Japan, China, Australia, and across all sectors, basically. So also, of course, in security and defense projects, and that is what the report was about.
Stephen, can I ask you a question here? So just so we can, for the Americans, about a third of our audience are American.
Yeah.
And to bridge for them, so public-private partnerships are used very extensively at the state and local level, not used at the federal level in the government, largely because the federal government doesn't want to give up control to private capital. But would it be fair, so that the American audience, primarily federal audience, can understand what you're talking about, PPPs, would it be fair to say that if you really stretch the definition of public-private partnerships, it could include any private capital being used to drive a public project? The PPP be that broadly defined?
Well, we have to be very careful with the definition, because of course otherwise you end up with every joint venture between the government and the private sector. But still, I think at the moment, if you look at the definition of the United Nations, if you look at the definition of the World Bank, if you have a contract including private finance, and if it's infrastructurally related, like a contract for 20, 30, maybe 15 years, then I think you're quite close to what we call in the EU a public-private partnership. So although there are nations, countries that claim not to use PPPs or that don't know the concept, they are still using it. By the way, we are in Paris. We have the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was the result of a PPP. So there is a very long tradition. Everybody is using it, but they are not. Maybe sometimes they say it's a PPP. Sometimes they call it concession. Now there are a lot of names: build, operate, transfer. So BOT. A lot of names, but I think still everybody is using it, but maybe not using the term PPP. Now, why are they using it, and why is it used across a lot of sectors, also in the defense? For example, cost efficiency, because PPPs bring in private sector efficiency, which is much needed in the government. They can also bring in innovation, which is one of the important topics of today. They can bring innovation, advanced technology, also to security and defense projects. Timely delivery. I know that many of you that have studied large infrastructure projects know that they almost always face a very long delay. And with PPPs, you see more on-time projects and less cost overruns. Long-term maintenance, which is one of the issues in many traditional infrastructure projects. The increase of the supply side capacity, which is a huge problem at the moment in the defense sector, because we don't have capacity. We have in the EU, we have a lack of industrial capacity. So PPPs can solve this to some extent by bringing in more companies, by bringing in more expertise, and by bringing together new companies. Scrutiny, the use of project finance, which is a very important element in PPPs, it will lead to due diligence, which can improve the quality of the project, and then the risk sharing, which is really at the core of PPPs. So, as opposed to traditional public procurement in PPPs, more attention is paid to risk sharing. So this is also a very important advantage. And then accelerated investment. If you set up PPPs, things go faster. But I must warn you, things go faster after contract close, not before contract close, because before contract close, it takes much longer, and which is logical, of course, because you make a 20-year contract. So you have to do it in a very good way.
Can I ask a question on this? So these factors that you've identified, Steve, are very much the same factors that NATO Diana works with as they're trying to accelerate dual-use technology. So one of the things that NATO Diana has done is they've decided, really, they're using an American approach that Americans call it other transactions. It really means starting from a blank page. That's the preferred approach for NATO Diana. Is it possible to use public-private partnerships in a structured way with structured forms, structured contracts? Or is it better to take a blank slate approach, a blank page approach?
I think starting from scratch is a bit of an issue. I think also because you have to compare at a given moment the solution. So I'm more in favor of a more structured approach where you really prepare the project in a very good way. But of course, preparing a project does not mean you know the solutions, and the solutions will be the outcome of the PPP procedure that you have to go through. And the PPP procedure is basically a public procurement procedure using a competitive dialogue, which is of course another topic. But basically, it's a procedure where you have to negotiate, where you have to go into a dialogue with the private sector. Let me give you some fact and figures. These are the PPPs over the years, the past 20 years. And it's interesting to see this because there is a decline, so a fall of PPPs the last 10, 15 years, which has to do with ideological reasons, also has to do with the financial crisis. And now, for me, this is very important, especially if you look at the defense sector. A lot of money is being poured in the defense sector, and there is also a huge investment need. And PPPs are not solving this problem at the moment. You see that the number of PPPs decreased. So I see this in a very positive way, as meaning as that there is a huge potential for PPPs in the near future. They have a huge potential, and we still have a way to go. I will come back to that. Now, on average, the size of the PPPs is between 100 and 250 million euros. So it's not like the traditional public procurement with the small contracts. This is real money, big projects. There are even some multi-billion-dollar projects in PPPs. And so once again, it's about big projects. And of course, with big projects, you can accelerate. And that is also very important. Now, let me come back to the report. I think, let me read the conclusion of the report. For over 20 years, PPPs have been used successfully to deliver projects for security and defense, infrastructure and services in several EU member states, not in all, but in quite a lot. Their use has been concentrated in a number of key markets. The key markets where the PPPs in defense have been used is accommodation and storage for equipment. So half of the projects are related to accommodation, housing of staff, or housing for military equipment. When applied in the right way for the right kind of projects, PPPs can help governments allocate risk more efficiently. I think that's a huge advantage. And mobilize technical and financial resources, so bringing in capital of the private sector. This is particularly important in the security and defense sector, where cost overruns and delays can be problematic. So I think it's true, of course, and I endorse this conclusion, but I think PPPs can lead to new ecosystems. They can bring in a lot of private companies, bringing in new solutions. They can lead to long-term cooperation, which is important because private companies will invest if they have a long-term cooperation. But one of the things we must be very careful, because just copy-pasting the way we did PPPs 10, 15 years ago is not the solution. We need to really embrace change and flexibility, because the world is changing rapidly. And we need to integrate this into the PPP models and into the PPP contracts. And by doing this, we will have solutions for changing supply chains, which is an issue, of course. Vendor dependency is something we have to bring in. We have to avoid lock-ins, and also technological evolution is something we have to integrate in a better way in the PPPs. And we are not used to that, because, as I said, most of the PPPs were focused on accommodation and on hard infrastructure like roads and bridges. So we need to bring in more of these AI and technological evolutions to make them really future-proof. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So for the class to understand where the back and forth here, what Stephen and I have been talking about is whether or not you want to start with set rules, set contract forms, and move forward to the next transaction using those, or as our colleagues at NATO do in the Diana program, really start from a blank slate. What Stephen was doing was arguing very eloquently for using existing forms, but then adjusting them. And this is the kind of professional decision that you guys will have to make on a regular basis. Do we start from scratch, understanding the principles and the goals, or do we use existing forms and adjust them for new goals? It's a very important part of being professional. Thank you very much. So,
That's a part of communication. I just had a question about talk about the dialogue and administrative procedures. When it comes to innovation, which has a wide exception in markets like AI, do you think those procedures, especially in PDPs, are fitted for the purpose of buying AI solutions?
Yeah, it's quite challenging. First of all, when I started doing PPPs 20 years ago, we tried to use like one stage procedures where you got the proposal without any room for negotiation. Of course, that did not work. So what does work is flexibility, is having competitive negotiations, having a dialogue. But then, of course, there is the second part of your question, technology and long-term contracts. That's also a huge challenge. And for that reason, I told you we need to adapt the models, because of course, it's important to have at all times the best available technology, but you need to find a right model, and also you need to find an investment model and a model to pay for this. And in traditional public procurement in Europe, we have like press text, so it's very difficult to change an existing contract And they even see that if you change it in a material way, you have to retender. And we need to find ways to work around that, because otherwise, of course, making a PPP contract that includes technological innovation will not be possible. And I think we can use the negotiations to work on that and to make the model better. And I think also in France, they have the experience of the concessions. Also, we do have concession clauses where you can integrate better technology at a given moment, and you rebalance the contract. So it is possible from a legal perspective, but you have to be very creative.
So, Hyan, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Cheryl will advance the slides for you. So Hyan's going to talk to us now about, coincidentally, about competitive dialogues, competitive procedure with negotiation, and the way that the United States does it. We call them competitive negotiations under FAR Part 15, Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 15. Hyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor, for giving me this opportunity to discuss about one of my research topic on the multilateral negotiation method, the comparison between the US and the EU public procurement system. So I'm Hyan Tran, a legal consultant at the World Bank Office of Suspension and Debarment, also the SJD at the GW Law programs. Today, I also have Lena Ranker, an LLM candidate from the law school, will comment on a few comparison points that I made. We have shared pretty similar research topic, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to collaborate and comment on each other research. So first of all, can I have the next slide, please? So first of all, I want to introduce what are the multilateral negotiation methods here. To begin, I want to introduce the three multilateral negotiation that use in the US and the EU system. These three procedures, they share a common purpose that they are allow public authority to engage in structured negotiation with the potential contractors when procuring for high complex or innovative solution. Under the US system, we have the Federal Acquisition Regulation FAR Part 15, mentioning the comparative negotiation that where the contracting officers can conduct discussion with interested offers within the comparative range. The comparative range here is a list of the most highly rated proposals that are eligible for further negotiation. This method is extremely flexible, thus there is no funding threshold. It can be used for nearly any type of procurements like infrastructure, service, R&D, IT or AI procurements, or defense program. The emphasis of this method is on the best value trade-off rather than lowest priority method. Second, in the EU system, unlike the US, where there's only one method for negotiation, in EU they have two separate methods, which is first the comparative dialogue that Professor Stephen have mentioned earlier in his presentation, is first introduced in the EU Directive Article 29. This method is used when a contracting authority cannot well define the technical or financial specification to meet a complex needs upfront. The selection of candidates will through a submit a request to participate without a full tender available. The next step will involve a dialogue phase where both sides can explore potential solution. This method is particularly suited for high complexity projects such as PPPs or major infrastructure or innovation-driven procurement. Lastly is the comparative procedure with negotiations, as mentioned in the EU Directive Article 30. This is slightly different from the comparative dialogue, but also include a negotiation phase. This method will invite bidder to submit the initial tenders. After shortlisting, the contracting authority then can negotiate with each bidder to refine and adjust their proposal. This method is designed for a moderately complex procurement, a situation where the needs are largely understood but still require some technical or pricing refinement. Together, this is three method is the core of the multilateral negotiation method in the public procurement. So to understand further about these three, I would love to discuss about the key difference of the three system. Can I go to the next slide, please?
I'm just quickly, we had a question from Dean Tillipman.
Sorry, I couldn't find any of my buttons. I apologize. Momentary lapse. This is really helpful. One of the questions that I have, and I think this is great because we're talking about procurement for innovation, and I know this is a big part of your research. What would you say in terms of the argument, and this is the issue that we're brushing up against, 15 allows us the greatest latitude in terms of negotiating ability to negotiate. For me, I'm most interested in that aspect of negotiating governance rights that you might not be able to get through regulation. The downside is that it's slow, it's clunky, and when we're dealing with innovation, it often leads to things, you're chasing a moving target and it's too slow for the method of buying some of these rapidly developing innovations. And the other part is that existing FAR clauses that you would integrate into a FAR 15 might not, for example, give the government the data rights that it needs broadly enough, for example, to preclude commercial firms from training their AI tools on government data. And so I guess in terms of your research, these are some benefits to it, right? But what about the drawbacks?
So that's a great question. I think this is what I learned from the formation class that from Schooner, that no method fits all. So there's always a downside for a certain method. So for part 15, there's some kind of like downside for this method that has the high discretion risk that could raise some like risk for like delay in the performance, or it may reduce like transparency at some point. And sometimes like the negotiations, successful or not, will based on the contracting officer expertise, like how much they know about the solutions. But all in all, I think for especially like very up to date product like AI or IT, which is sometimes the market is like the procuring officers do not know like what is the most available methods or products outside in the market. So I think this negotiations method is still a good one, even it's take a long time, but it could give a more satisfied procurement at the end.
Go next slide.
Okay, so on the key differences between these methods, I think they all have the similarity that they both handle, designed to handle like complex or innovative procurement with structured negotiation to reduce the informational gaps and allow like revision of proposal and focus on best value. But the differences is on the US side, the system is marked by broadly flexibility and a culture of agency discretion. The FAR Part 15 like serve on a single highly adaptable negotiation framework that can use for all complexity level. And the US system also have the oversight mechanism through GAO protest system that can ensure the accountability without rigid the procedure constraint. In the contrast, the EU system is highly codified and rule-intensive method. It draws a sharper distinction between procedure based on complexity, the comparative dialogue, and the comparative procedure with negotiation are two separate methods. Each of it has its own legal condition, sequence rules, and transparency requirements. I would love to have Lena, if you have any comments on the comparison between the two systems.
Yes, I wanted to touch on what you said about the US having a culture of discretion. I think that using numerical ratings and scoring systems is commonly used in the European Union when evaluating bids. And a key difference from the United States is that such scoring systems is only seen as a tool in the US, which means that the agencies, after they have used scoring systems, still have discretion to document why the offer still provides better value for the government. So I think this encourages the US agencies to negotiate more because they know they're able to evaluate solutions holistically and not being having to adhere to more rigid scoring systems that are common in the EU. So I think that when procurement becomes more innovation driven, I think that the EU may benefit from thinking more about flexibility within the set procurement procedures. Thank you, and back to you, Milan.
Thank you both. We've gone a little bit over time, but I want to see if anybody had any questions before we close out. No? Our favorite professor.
No, of course, I'm very interested in the comparison between the EU system and the US. That's a conversation we've had for many years about the cultural difference. And I think I would like just to underscore 2 points. First one is, I think there is also to take into consideration the huge criminal law environment of the US public procurement system. Definitely not the case in whatever country. And the second point is about the protest mechanism, which is very effective, but only for the second rank contractor or candidate. This is not the case in the EU. All bidders may be able to participate and to enter into a challenge. And even it goes further in some countries like France, where you have even third parties able to challenge the award of the contract. So I think you have also to enlarge the perspective about these counterbalance effect of the protest mechanism. So it's more a comment than a question.
Thank you very much for that. I also want to close out just discussing the issue that we had, the question we had regarding risk aversion in government officials. It's risk aversion. If I make a mistake, I'll lose my job. It's a very common problem in procurement. And you see it in some institutions more than others. The thing for you guys to think about is, how is it that the professionals around you deal with risk mitigation? How do we deal with risk in our lives so that we can take risk? This program is a huge risk. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this, ever, okay? The trick is, the professionals you see around you, what we do is we have multiple strands so that if we have a failure in one area, we can do something else. That's why we're training you guys in so many different areas, so that if you have a failure in one area, you can just go to another area. It allows you to embrace risk rather than trying to avoid it in your careers, because it's the key to your success. Okay, thanks.
We do have 2 raised hands. Do we have time for just a few questions?
Sure.
I saw Russell first, if you can go ahead with your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, I apologize. I am not at GW, and I am not anyone nearly as distinguished as the dean, who I think is waiting with the next question. I am an outsider, and thank you very much for letting me join today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a former judge advocate and an attorney in the procurement world here in Michigan. I've practiced for approximately 30 years. I am an outsider here. To all your students there, you're very lucky to be at GW and learning with the dean and everybody. I had to go through the JAG school to learn all of this stuff, and I learned it in the trenches, and I am still learning it from all the experts that you have the pleasure to learn from. But anyhow, getting back to my question, I apologize. I did not get the names of the ladies that just spoke, the 2 women that just spoke. The young lady who made the comments referring to the discretionary use of the different models in the US versus the more rigid structures in the EU, getting slightly off topic, yet still directly relevant, at least here in the United States. One of the problems that I've certainly run into in my career and is prevalent in the United States is obviously procurement fraud. How do you see taking the regulatory models as you've presented here under 15 or any of the new FAR clauses as it's being written? Maybe perhaps in your experience in the EU, or if the dean in her experience wants to chime in here, how do you see the new FAR or the new approaches addressing the obvious issue that we're going to have to deal with? You know, perhaps new ways to address regulatory fraud, new ways to address procurement issues in the United States or in other countries. And I'll defer to the obvious open-ended question there. But I was just curious because you had mentioned the more rigid structure in EU versus the more open-ended discretionary use in the US. But obviously with that discretion comes the temptation to abuse that discretion. Thank you very much for taking my question.
Jessica, we're also still being here, having been referred to as the young woman asking the question. So we'll leave. Do you want to respond to that question, Jessica?
Sure. So just briefly, in terms of the increased discretion, I don't have the study name off the top of my head, but we talked about it when all of us were in Lisbon. One of the most prominent studies shows that actually the vast majority of procurement issues come from incompetence rather than actual corruption. So that to me points more towards capacity issues, which I think are going to be under tremendous strain in the United States, given the complete overhaul of our rule system and in the way that it's done. I just did a podcast with someone yesterday, Sam Lee, if you may know who he is, who's a champion of small businesses, about the overhaul. And I think there's kind of widespread agreement that many of the changes, not all of them, have actually been quite good in terms of the way they've reorganized the FAR in sense of the procurement life cycle. Some of it is more streamlined, and that's been quite helpful. I think bigger concerns we have are the kind of moving things into buying guides or things that are sub-regulatory guidance rather than regulatory, which leads a blurry line both in litigation context, but also it's the same issue that my colleague Chris and my colleague Steve and I have always had with PGI, program guidance information, that it can be changed at any time with no notice. And it increases the amount of reading and things that people will need to brush up on an already strained workforce that does not have quite the capacity to already deal with existing rules, but now has a whole set of rules dumped on it, and varying agencies have adopted it. And the way that it's really been done is antithetical to both kind of our longstanding regulatory and administrative procedure, democracy, frankly. And so I think that all of these things are challenges, even if I think that some of the changes they've made have been good. Look, I think, and the reason I had my hand raised was actually to get to this issue of risk aversion. And I think it ties in nicely with your issue of discretion, which is that part of the problem that we have is that it's the lawyers. And I say this as a lawyer, training lawyers, right? And Chris, I know Chris agrees with me about this. We train our students on cases which are baked into scenarios of failure, right? We are training our students to become future litigators to fight over these procurement decisions. And so as lawyers, we have a significant amount of risk aversion. And the challenge that we have is that contracting officials are not necessarily the best at communicating with lawyers about how their innovations can comply with the law and do it in a way that does not create unnecessary risk. And one of the reasons I think in the GW program we now have degrees for non-lawyer acquisition professionals is that we train them to think like lawyers and write like lawyers, and they succeed so well because they can go to a lawyer and say, look, I've thought through the legal risks of this innovation, and I know you're risk averse. They won't say that, but but try this. And so I think a lot of this gets back again, and I keep coming back to it, is capacity. How are we training our acquisition workforce to think like lawyers, to think about risk, but to communicate things effectively in a way that can give people comfort in experimenting? And I'll leave with one quote that, and I'm going to totally misquote him, but I just had Scott Simpson, who used to be part of the Procurement Innovation Lab in the United States. And he had this saying, and again, I'm butchering it, I wish I had it concretely, which is like small failures or fail small, right? Try something in a small way that won't have as much consequence. Try a unique procurement technique. Try something that's not prohibited. And that's part of what the innovation and the overhaul is designed to do, is to give latitude to experiment. The challenge with all of this is that, you know, the way Scott's going about it is amazing. And they've been doing it for years, where they really bought into the former language of the FAR that said, if it's not prohibited, you can try it. He's also a lawyer, so when he would do it, he could explain it to his legal counsel. Why am I doing this? And why is there a reduced protest risk? And Scott would also say, come on, bring on the protests. I want this to be challenged because I want to show people you can do it. And so I think it's a mindset shift, but I also think in the United States, and I apologize, I realize this is a global audience, is that we're doing it in the worst possible way. We've just completely butchered, you know, acquisition workforce through these RIFs and through incentivized retirements. And we've really just gone about this and created a culture where consistently federal employees are being used as leverage in budget negotiations. And then we're saying to that, on top of them, go ahead and experiment and innovate and do radical things when their jobs are on the line.
Yeah.
They've been called parasites. And so, you know, the United States, I think there's a lot of good out there, and there are a lot of people that have been working in the procurement system for a long time that could really do some good things. But the culture right now is so negative, it really does not inspire innovation. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox. I talked too long.
No, and if I may, Dean, you mentioned excellent point, and I was going to throw in the issue on my question, dealing with the regulatory and how do we deal with things gone wrong in this field now that we've basically thrown out the entire inspector general departments in every department of the federal government. We don't have people to patrol or review the system. So the procurement people are going to have to basically patrol themselves until the system rebuilds itself, until the institutional knowledge and integrity comes back. And I agree with, you know, having been an insider like you are, with what you said. Absolutely. You are 110% correct. And until the institutional knowledge comes back, until the institutional experience comes back, those problems, at least the public concern is going to be out there, that it's either going to be abused or that the people that are risk adverse to not experiment, not try things in a way that's going to better the public, better the good of the procurement world. They're just simply not going to do it because they're afraid of their paycheck. They're afraid for their retirements. And that's to be expected because they've got to put food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you both for your questions and comments. We're going to have to close out there. We run over time. Or would you have a question?
A question for Mr.
Should I?
Does Gabrielle have a question as well?
Should I just say that as well?
Sure. Go ahead.
Because you have a question.
You mentioned before that 60% of the private sector do not really know about the innovative procurement. So my question is, first, do you think it's because lack of laws or lack of strategic policies that are made by the government, one? And two, as the OECD, do you think that the OECD can help governments to engage more in private sector? Because like I come from Milan, and I know that the government doesn't have the know-how of how to engage the private sector into the public opinion surveys.
Great questions. Thank you so much. Well, the answer to the first question is that when it comes to the private sector, I think that most of the private sector companies, what they know about procurement is about this very simple processes that are going on. And basically when they come to that innovation solutions, they are a bit, they need to have more guidance on how to approach the government, how to basically tell them, to show them that they have these innovative solutions. So in one hand, what I already showed you in some of the examples is that there are certain platforms that are created by the governments or government agencies where actually companies can upload their innovative solutions, showcasing what they can do. And eventually procurement officers, together with government innovators, they can visit these platforms and just, pick and maybe communicate with those companies and to better understand what are the solutions that they are offering. Because as I mentioned, since innovation procurement can be a lengthy process, sometimes understanding that there are already existing solutions in the market can help reduce the time that is spent with procurement in order to get the best solutions that are out there. And to answer your second question about what the OECD can do and how they can facilitate these kind of discoveries, is actually one of those is for us to gather these examples from different countries and showcase them in the form of tools, in the form of publications, or we also in a form of government programs, as what I mentioned, what we did already in Croatia, and what we will do, for example, next week in Estonia, in a form of a webinar, is that we are reaching out through the government to economic operators. We invite them to join us in the webinars, and then we will basically present them what we know about innovation procurement. And we also bring some examples from other countries, how they do it there. And then we also, and that's the most important part, we also bring in some successful examples of innovation projects from the given country, because those are the most important examples that can actually generate the biggest awareness and the biggest buy-in from the economic operator side when it comes to pushing forward innovation procurement. Thank you.
It's much easier to tell people what to do, but then they don't do it. So to get them to do it, giving examples is very, very important. Thank you. Okay. I think that's it in terms of questions.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
All right.
thank you all for your patience. And again, we'll be on the same time. Tomorrow is Friday, therefore it must be in Milan.
Yes.
From Milan tomorrow. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you all. Out here.